So please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome the final performer and reader tonight, Ryan Britt. Ryan, shake.
Thank you. Despite being raised by an Irish Catholic father from Flagstaff, Arizona, and having a mother who was an agnostic former Protestant from West Virginia, I was nonetheless identified in first grade as a Jew. My best friend at the time was a boy named David Lowe. And David Lowe, unlike any of the other boys in 1987 in first grade, was not obsessed with He-Man or Transformers, but rather shared my obsession with Star Trek. So we were both Trekkies together and inseparable. We also had another Jewish companion friend, non-Trekkie, named Robbie Cohen, who would follow us everywhere on the playground as we played Beam Me Up and set phasers on stun and things like that. Now, the reason I was outed as a Jew, just because it was suburban Arizona in the late 1980s, does not mean that there were not young agents of the Gestapo afoot. Because we had one in our class named Billy Wilder. And Billy Wilder points out one day to my first grade teacher, Mrs. Baker, "Did you realize, Mrs. Baker, that there are 3 Jews in our first grade class?" And creepily, Mrs. Baker turns to him and says, "No, there are only 2. You know, like she's keeping score, like she knows how many Jews are in the first grade class. And she goes, "You know, you got Robbie Cohen, you got David Lowe, who's the 3rd?" And he goes, "Ryan Britt. Ryan Britt's a Jew. He hangs out with them." And she turns to me and says, "Is this true? Are you a Jew?" And I look at her and I say, yes, I am Jewish. Because I have no idea what a Jew is. This was news to my mom, who was a teacher at the school that I attended. And Mrs. Baker, of course, had a conversation with her in the staff lounge today about how Ryan is a Jew. Now, the funny thing is that I've recently come to realize that my mother knows nothing about what Jews are, even to this day. Over a glass of what can be described as the best box wine money can buy, my mother turns to my current Israeli girlfriend this past Christmas and tells her that the Jews are her favorite religion. They're her absolute favorite religion. A friend of hers has just actually transformed into a Jew. It's the exact word she uses. And her reason that it's her favorite one is because they don't believe in all that Bible mumbo jumbo. And Gabrielle and I did not have the heart to tell her about the chosen people's involvement with the authorship of the Old Testament. In any case, back in first grade, my mother, this is the woman who raised me, so I believed that Jews believed in the healing power of crystals and unicorns. I had no idea. Billy had outed me as another word for friend. David and Robbie were my friends. David and Robbie were Jews. David was a Jew as I was a Jew, as Robbie was a Jew, and we were all Jews together. And so, if Jesus was the carpenter, then I was down with the walrus. It was absolutely fine. This persisted throughout my life. I developed a little bit of a tic to where I would just kind of subconsciously never let go of this fact, even though I didn't know what I was talking about. And after I discovered that Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock in real life were Jews, I thought that this was my club. This was where I belonged. This is a Hebrew letter. So it was over. To the point at a party 2 years ago, everything I like, I just assume is Jewish automatically. A writer, a director, a comedian, I just assume they're all Jewish. And so I was at a party 2 years ago, and I told 2 actual Jews that Kurt Vonnegut was one of theirs. Because I'm such a huge, he's got to be. He's got to be. I love him. And they were blown away. This naturally spilled over into my love life. And though I haven't dated many Jews, my longest girlfriend is Israeli. And for an American goy, dating an American Jew is like dating Elaine from Seinfeld. For an American goy dating an Israeli Jew, it's like sleeping with the Zohan. This is some serious shit. The first reason I knew that I was going to like Gabriella is because she came and she looked at my bookshelf. And she owned all the same books, anyway, so she just claimed the books were already hers and always had been and always would be, very, very Israeli. But we really bonded over our love of science fiction and of Star Trek, but of highbrow, science fiction too, like novels and stuff. The first book that she read in English was Lord of the fucking Rings, you know, so she's translating like Elvish into Hebrew, you know, when I'm in first grade, like thinking that I'm a Jew, which is fantastic. But the one thing that kept us together culturally wasn't science fiction, wasn't her demanding, you know, Israeli ways, but a more you know, true and traditional Israeli tradition, which is lots of pubic hair, of course. You know, this was the big one. We've had a you know, an on and off again relationship throughout the years, and in 2008, summer of 2008, it was a definite off period, a very off period. So much so that I went back to Arizona for a month to stay with my parents, my folks, and drink heavily and stuff like that. Now, the one thing, I don't know if anybody's, you know, we all live in New York, we all live in the East Coast, and maybe it's a weather thing, but I've noticed a big difference between, you know, nice Jewish girls on the East Coast versus, you know, blonde peroxide girls on the West Coast, is the blonde ones on the West Coast had only shaved pussies. You know, like just complete, it's like a uniform on the West Coast completely, you know. And I had grown very accustomed to the former on, you know, living in New York and dating Israeli. And so when I was out away from my girlfriend, you know, trying to make her jealous because we were on a break and just, you know, trying to get laid, it happened the first time I was drunk and I just could not for the life of me, you know, get it up, you know. And I'm like, oh, it's the booze, you know, it's just the booze. But I think that it was the Brazilian, you know what I mean? I think that the Brazilian was the culprit. I think that I had grown accustomed to a fair amount of growth. And as a result, like really needed that in order to, you know, and then so I was like, you know, there was a Becky and a Stacy and a Margaret and nothing, you know. The case of the missing boner, I attributed it to my love of the Israeli bush. So I ended up coming back to New York, and you know, after a few months, you know, things started getting going again, and there are many reasons, you know, that I have, but I think that was the one that got me back together to this day. When I like to think that if I'm ever faced with the question again, you know, the firing squad again, you know, are you Jewish? I'm going to say, you know, I am for right now. Thank you very much.